Once upon a time, though not so long ago as you might hope, there lived a young man who did not believe in shadows that moved on their own. He was not a brave man, exactly. He was simply a man who had never been given a reason to be afraid. He had grown up in a city of noise and light where the darkness was always just a power cut away from being solved, where the strange sounds at night were always just pipes, always just wind, always just the settling of old walls. He told himself this often. He told himself this the way people repeat a familiar prayer, not because they are certain it is true, but because the saying of it brings comfort. Because silence, when it is deep enough and dark enough, has a way of making even the most rational mind reach for something to hold on to. It was 11:47 p.m. when he pushed open the rusted iron gate. Q. Gate did not open easily. It resisted him, groaning like something old and unwilling, like the door to a place that had decided long ago that it preferred to stay closed. The hinges shrieked, a long metallic cry that split the silence of the night and sent a colony of blackbirds scattering from the dead trees overhead, their wings beating against the sky like panicked hearts. He stood for a moment in the open gateway and looked down the long driveway that stretched ahead of him. It was cracked and overgrown, pale weeds pushing up through the broken asphalt like fingers reaching from beneath the earth. Dead trees lined either side, their bare branches twisted upward in shapes that looked almost, if you were the sort of person who noticed such things, like hands frozen mid-scream. At the end of the driveway, the hospital waited. It had been closed for nearly a decade, this place. Once it had been full of life, of nurses moving quickly through bright corridors, of doctors with tired eyes and steady hands, of patients who came broken and left healed, or did not leave at all. Now it was something else entirely, a husk, a shell of what it once was, stripped of purpose and left to rot on the edge of the city, where no one had to look at it too closely. The building was large and dark against the sky. Several of its windows were broken, their jagged edges catching the weak moonlight like the teeth of something hungry. The brickwork was stained with years of rain and neglect, dark streaks running down from the roofline like old tears. Most people avoided it. The city had grown used to looking the other way when they passed the road that led to it. Children dared each other to touch the gate and run. Teenagers whispered stories about it at sleepovers, and the old women who sat outside the bakery on the corner would sometimes nod toward it and say things in low voices that trailed off into silence when strangers came too close. The stories were many. Some said that in the final months before the hospital closed, patients had died under circumstances that no one could properly explain, that the records had been sealed, that the doctors had refused to speak about what they had seen. Others claimed that people who wandered into the building at night came back changed, quieter, hollower, as if something inside them had been gently removed. And then there were those who said that the people who went in at night did not come back at all. He did not believe any of it. To him, it was just a job. He had recently taken a position as a night shift security guard, having answered an advertisement in the back of a local paper. The pay was modest. The hours were unsociable. But he needed the work, and the work needed someone willing to do it without asking too many questions. His supervisor was a short, wide man with the kind of face that had clearly decided, somewhere in middle age, to stop expressing emotions altogether. He had handed over the keys across a desk littered with cold coffee cups and said, with the precise tone of someone conveying information they have no personal interest in, "Just keep an eye on the cameras, and stay in the security room if you can." That was it. No long instructions, no list of protocols, no emergency numbers written on a card. Just that single sentence delivered with the careful neutrality of a man who knew something he had chosen not to say. He had not thought much about it at the time. He thought about it now. The driveway crunched beneath his boots as he walked toward the entrance. Every footstep felt too loud in the silence. The dead trees watched him pass with their twisted arms raised. Above, the moon hung low and swollen, its light the color of old bone, casting long pale shadows across the cracked ground. He reached the front doors. They were heavy, institutional things, the kind designed to swing open for gurneys and wheelchairs and the urgent, purposeful traffic of a working hospital. Now they opened slowly, reluctantly, with a groan of hinges that had not been oiled in years. At midnight he stepped inside. The main hallway stretched before him, long and dark and very, very still. The ceiling was high and institutional, the kind built for efficiency rather than comfort. Most of the overhead lights were dead, their fixtures hanging empty or shattered, but a few still flickered weakly, casting pools of pale, sickly light that did more to deepen the shadows around them than to illuminate anything useful. The air was thick with the smell of abandonment. Dust and mold, the ghost of old disinfectant, and beneath it all something else, something damp and organic and deeply unpleasant, like the smell of something that had been left somewhere it shouldn't be. He breathed through his mouth and kept walking. The hallway felt frozen in time, as though the hospital had simply stopped one ordinary afternoon and never started again. Old hospital beds still lined the walls and some of the side rooms, their mattresses stained and sunken. Torn curtains hung from rusted metal rails, drifting slightly in a draft that had no obvious source. Wheelchairs sat abandoned in corners, their wheels turned at odd angles, as if their occupants had simply evaporated mid-journey and left the chairs to remember them. Here and there, objects lay scattered on the floor. A single shoe, a clipboard with papers still attached, their ink, long since faded to ghost marks. A child's drawing pinned to a wall with a single thumbtack depicting. He looked away before he could see it clearly. He kept his flashlight pointed straight ahead and did not look into the rooms on either side. Eventually, after several long minutes of walking, he found the security office. It was a small room off the main corridor, tucked between a storage closet and what had once been a nurse's station. Inside, a desk had been recently cleared, presumably by whoever had last held this job, and on it sat a bank of dusty monitors, connected to the building's camera system. He sat down, brushed a film of dust from the nearest screen, and pulled up the feed. There were 12 cameras in total, covering different parts of the building. He studied each one in turn as the grainy black and white footage loaded. Reception, empty. Emergency ward, empty. ICU corridor, empty. Basement entrance, empty. Surgery hallway, empty. Pediatric wing, empty. All of it still, all of it silent, all of it exactly as an abandoned building at midnight should look. He settled back in his chair and let out a slow breath. His shoulders dropped slightly. The tension he had carried in from the gate began gradually to ease. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. The clock on the wall ticked. The monitors hummed. Somewhere in the building's deep interior, something dripped with slow, steady patience. He scrolled through his phone. He read the news. He thought about what he would have for breakfast in the morning. At 12:30 a.m., nothing. At 1:10 a.m., still nothing. He was almost comfortable. Almost bored. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the building breathe around him. Because old buildings do breathe in their way, expanding and contracting with the temperature, settling into the earth beneath them, making small sounds that are only frightening if you let your imagination fill in the reasons for them. He was not going to let his imagination do anything of the sort. Then at 2:03 a.m., something moved on one of the screens. Camera 7, the ICU corridor. He sat forward slowly, frowning at the monitor. At first he thought it was a glitch, a smear of digital noise, a camera adjusting to a change in light. It happened sometimes with old equipment. He knew this. He told himself this. But then he looked more carefully. At the far end of the corridor, at the very edge of the camera's range, where the image dissolved into grainy darkness, something was standing. A shape. A dark silhouette, perfectly still. It was tall. Tall enough that its proportions seemed slightly wrong for the space it occupied, the way an adult looks wrong standing in a room designed for children. It stood with a stillness that felt less like the stillness of someone waiting, and more like the stillness of something that did not need to move, that had perhaps no particular reason to move. That was simply there, and had been there for longer than he had been watching. His first thought, his rational, sensible, perfectly reasonable first thought, was that a homeless person had found their way into the building. It happened. Abandoned structures attracted people who needed shelter. He had been told to watch for exactly this kind of thing. He leaned forward and zoomed in on the monitor. The image sharpened incrementally, pixel by uncertain pixel, and that was when something felt wrong. Not wrong in an abstract, difficult to articulate way. Wrong in the way that the body understands before the mind catches up. A tightening of the stomach, a prickling at the back of the neck, a sudden, primitive awareness that something in the picture did not follow the rules he had always assumed the world operated by. The hallway lights in that section of the corridor were completely dead. He could see this clearly on the monitor. Not dimmed, not flickering. Dead. No light source, of any kind, anywhere near the figure. So how was there a shadow? Because there was a shadow. Cast behind the figure, long and dark, stretching back down the corridor away from him. A shadow that required a light source. A shadow that had no business being there. His stomach tightened further. His mouth went dry. He picked up his flashlight, clipped his radio to his belt, and left the security office. The building felt colder now. He noticed it immediately. A drop in temperature that hadn't been there before, as if the night had exhaled, through the walls. His breath didn't mist, quite, but the chill was real and present, settling against his skin through his jacket. He walked quickly, keeping his flashlight beam steady ahead of him. Every footstep echoed through the empty hallways, each sound returning to him slightly changed, slightly wrong, as echoes in large empty spaces always do, as if something else was walking just slightly out of phase with him. He told himself. It was just echoes. He turned into the ICU corridor and stopped. It was empty. He stood very still for a moment, flashlight sweeping the length of the corridor from one end to the other. Bare walls, broken light fixtures, the dark rectangles of closed doors. At the far end, where the figure had been standing, nothing. Just darkness, and the faint smell of something chemical and old. He walked to the end of the corridor anyway, checked every doorway, shone his light into every corner, found nothing, found no sign that anyone had been there, no disturbance in the dust, no footprints, no warmth in the air that might suggest a recently vacated presence. He stood at the end of the corridor for a long moment, listening. Silence. He returned to the security office. He sat back down in front of the monitors and looked at camera 7. Ew. Shadow was there again, standing in the exact same place. His heartbeat quickened, not racing, not yet, but quickening, becoming noticeable, becoming a thing he was aware of in a way that he was not usually aware of it. He stared at the screen, told himself again about the homeless person, about equipment malfunctions, about the way old buildings play tricks with air and light, about the fact that there was always an explanation. And then the shadow moved, not like a person walking, not like any movement he had a ready explanation for. It slid forward. That was the only word for it, slid, as if it were not walking but being drawn toward the camera by some slow and patient current. Smooth, continuous, without the rhythm of footsteps or the sway of a body in motion. He ran. Back, down the corridor, back to the ICU hallway. Flashlight beam jumping with his movement, shadows lurching and wheeling around him as he ran. He was not a man who ran from things, generally. He arrived at the corridor breathless and wide-eyed, his flashlight sweeping the space in rapid arcs. Nothing. The hallway was completely empty. He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, listening to his own pulse. Then he went back to the monitors. The shadow had moved closer, significantly closer. In the time it had taken him to run to the corridor and back, it had covered more than half the length of the hallway on screen. A distance that should have taken far longer to traverse, even at a run. Now he could see it more clearly. The shape was tall, taller than he had first thought, taller than any person he had ever seen, its head nearly brushing what appeared to be the ceiling of the corridor on the monitor. Its head was tilted to one side at an angle that seemed slightly beyond the range of comfortable human movement. And its arms. He looked at its arms for a long time, hoping he was miscalculating, hoping it was a distortion of the camera lens. Its arms hung far too long. Far, far too long. They did not end at the thighs, the way a person's arms should. They hung past the knees, almost to the ankles, long and thin and completely still, hanging at its sides with the absolute motionless patience of something that had learned long ago that it did not need to hurry. He picked up his phone and called his supervisor. The call did not connect. He tried again. Nothing. Not even a dial tone. Just silence. And then the quiet electronic sound of a connection that was never made. He moved to the doorway of the security office, held the phone up, walked, in a slow circle, no signal, not a single bar. His phone, which had been working perfectly well an hour ago, had simply lost all connection to the outside world. The entire building was a dead zone. He looked back at the monitors. The time read 3:07 a.m. At that exact moment, camera 4, the one facing the reception area, filled with static, not a gradual degradation, not a flicker followed by a slow fade. It simply exploded into violent churning static in a single instant, the screen blazing white and gray noise that seemed almost loud despite producing no sound at all. He leaned forward, transfixed. The static churned and shifted, and for just a moment, one single terrible moment, a face appeared within it. A pale face. Gaunt and white as candle wax, the features slightly too symmetrical, slightly too still. The expression neither frightened nor peaceful, but something else altogether. Something that had no name he could reach for. It was wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown, the thin institutional kind, the collar visible at the bottom of the frame. Its eyes were open, and completely empty. Not blank, empty, in the way that a house is empty when every piece of furniture has been removed and the walls have been stripped bare and what remains is just a space that used to contain something. The face was there for 1 second, perhaps 2. Then the static swallowed it again. He was already on his feet. He did not decide to run. His body made that decision without consulting him. A very old and very sensible part of his brain taking charge of the situation, while the reasoning, skeptical part was still busy trying to construct alternative explanations. He ran to the reception hall. His flashlight beam strobed through the darkness as he moved, revealing corridor after corridor in brief, jerking snapshots. A door frame, a fallen ceiling tile, the glint of broken glass, an overturned trolley lying on its side like a fallen animal. He skidded into the reception area and swept his flashlight across the space. The chairs were still there, bolted in rows to the floor, their upholstery cracked and peeling. The reception desk sat at an angle, one corner collapsed, papers and folders spilled across its surface. Dust lay thick over everything, undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of movement. He stood in the middle of the reception area, breathing hard, trying to slow his heartbeat through the sheer force of rational thinking. There is always an explanation, he told himself. There has to be. He turned to walk back, and heard it. From the direction of the ICU corridor. A sound that did not belong to pipes or wind or the settling of old walls. Metal wheels. Scraping across a tiled floor. Slow. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Clack. 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 The sound of a hospital stretcher being pushed by someone who was in no particular hurry. Who had perhaps all the time in the world. His breathing slowed to almost nothing. His flashlight hand was shaking now. He could feel it trembling against his grip, the beam of light quivering against the floor. He turned very slowly and pointed the flashlight down the corridor. At the far end, emerging from the shadows, with the terrible slowness of something from a dream, a stretcher rolled into view. No one was pushing it. It moved under its own quiet momentum, wheels turning without friction, without resistance, as if the laws of physics had agreed in this particular place to make an exception. It came forward at a steady, unhurried pace, and as it came into the light he could see that it was not empty. A body lay upon it, covered from head to foot with a white hospital sheet. The sheet was pristine, impossibly, inexplicably clean. For a building abandoned for a decade, white as fresh snow, without a mark or a stain. The shape beneath it was long and very still. The stretcher rolled to a stop directly beneath the camera. Directly beneath him, in a sense. Directly in view. Then, the sheet began to move, not pulled back by a hand, not disturbed by movement underneath. It slid, the same sliding motion as the shadow on the monitor. That same smooth, unhurried, gravity-defying movement. Slid downward from the face of whatever lay beneath it, revealing by inches the pale skin, the gaunt cheekbones, the two still features of the face he had seen in the static. Up close it was worse. The face was the face of someone who had once been a person, and was now something that remembered being a person the way an echo remembers a sound. The features were right, individually. But assembled together, in that particular stillness, with that particular quality of absolute absence, they formed something that made every instinct he possessed scream a single unified message at him. Run. The eyes opened. And the moment they did, at the precise instant those empty eyes opened and oriented toward him with a slowness that suggested it already knew exactly where he was and had always known, all 12 monitors in the security office turned to static, simultaneously, all of them. The screens he had been watching all night erupting into white noise in a single coordinated instant, as if something had cut every feed at once. The lights in the hallway went out, all of them. Every flickering, failing fluorescent tube extinguished in a single breath, plunging the corridor into a darkness so complete and so absolute that for a moment his flashlight seemed barely to dent it. And then, somewhere in the darkness ahead, of him somewhere between where he stood and where the stretcher had stopped, something began to run. He heard it before he saw anything, the sound of something moving fast across the tiled floor, a rapid, irregular rhythm that was almost like footsteps but not quite. Not quite right, not quite human, the spacing wrong, the weight distribution wrong, the sound of it wrong in a way that he could not have described to anyone but that he felt in his bones with perfect, horrible clarity. It was coming toward him. He ran. He ran back through the reception hall, back down the main corridor toward the entrance, not thinking, not rationalizing, not reaching for explanations. He ran the way every human being runs when they have finally, completely, and undeniably encountered something for which they have no framework. Purely, desperately, with every thought dissolved into the single burning imperative of a way. He hit the front doors at full speed. They swung open. The night air hit him like cold water. He did not stop running until he reached the gate. Until he was through the gate and on the road beyond it. Until the rusted iron shrieked shut behind him and he was standing on the cracked pavement outside with his hands on his knees and his heart hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to leave his body entirely. He looked back at the building. It sat at the end of the driveway, dark and silent and patient, the way it had always been. No movement at the door. No shadow in the broken windows. Nothing pursuing him. Nothing visible at all. But in one of the upper windows, One of the windows he had never visited, in a part of the building he had never entered, a pale shape was standing. Still. Watching. He never finished that shift. He drove home with the heater on full and every light in his car blazing, and he did not sleep that night. And when the sun finally came up, he called his supervisor and said he was leaving the job effective immediately. His supervisor was quiet, for a moment on the other end of the line. Then he said, very carefully, "What did you see?" And when the young man tried to describe it, the shadow, the face in the static, the stretcher, the eyes opening, his supervisor was quiet again for a very long time. Then he said, "You were the seventh." He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't want to know. The hospital still stands at the edge of the city, surrounded by its dead trees and its broken lights, its gate still rusted, its driveway still cracked. People still avoid the road that leads to it. The old women at the bakery still lower their voices when someone comes too close to the subject. And sometimes on nights when the moon hangs low and swollen and the air carries the particular quality of stillness that belongs only to very old and very forgotten places, those who happen to look in the right direction, at the right window, at the right moment, say they can see it, a shape, pale, perfectly still, standing just inside the glass, waiting with the infinite patience of something that has nowhere else to be, and nothing left to do except wait for the next person who does not believe in shadows that move on their own. And sooner or later, there is always one. There always will be. The end.